It's fun to speculate what could have happened or been in any aspects of our lives. The concept of the possibility of different outcomes or spawning completely different futures and timelines has become a very popular topic in recent years, whether it's in film, sports, and especially in the world of gaming. Recently, I've explored the vast cosmos of the internet and gathered some of the biggest speculations of events throughout the history of gaming, asked by none other than the gaming community themselves. Join us here today at Mad Gear Arcade as we explore 6 of the biggest what-ifs in gaming history. Number 1. What if Square never created Final Fantasy? It's no secret to people who know me that I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. It's become one of the biggest, popular, and greatest franchises in the history of gaming. What was originally supposed to be the last game from a struggling studio ended up being a surprise hit that over 35 years later has spawned a whopping 15 additional main entries and more spin-offs than you can shake a chocobo tail feather at. The impact the series has had on both Western and JRPGs is undeniable. So what if Square decided to make a different game instead? Well, for one, series like Pokemon, Dragon Quest, and Persona that still use classic turn-based gameplay to this day would be totally different or may not even existed at all. Not to mention the visual and musical impact Final Fantasy has had over the years, with some of the best cutscenes and soundtrack in gaming history. The only positive that could come from such a depressing alternate reality is the rise of the tactical RPG. Series like Ultima, Shining Force, and Ogre Battle may have reached mainstream success, and maybe Fire Emblem would have never turned into a friggin' dating sim. Number 2. What if EverQuest never released? EverQuest released in 1999 for the PC and was one of the first MMOs to achieve mainstream success. It basically became the blueprint for everything that followed for the next several years and popularized the genre. Along with Doom, it was the most popular PC game of the 90s. Without it, World of Warcraft quite possibly would have never existed along with so many other online games. But what if it never happened? The MMO genre would still exist, just not on the grand scale it is today. First-person shooters would still dominate the market, but may have never evolved past the classic 8 to 16 player deathmatch templates that powered so many LAN parties back in the day. The esports scene would eventually get boring, and consoles would continue to keep evolving and eventually make the PC an obsolete platform for gaming. Number 3. What if the Dreamcast didn't flop? Sega launched the Dreamcast, their final console, on September 9th, 1999, or 9999. Sadly, it was only on the market for 2 years before being discontinued, which even in retrospect is shocking from how much potential it had. It was the first of the 6th generation of consoles that had online connectivity and stellar sports titles. However, once the PlayStation 2 launched, it was all over for Sega, as the Dreamcast specs just couldn't keep up with Sony's newest offering, and they had no choice but to downgrade the company to third developer game status. But what if support for the system lasted longer? Well, the online era of gaming was just beginning, and it would have been very difficult for Microsoft to enter the market when they did. And while the Xbox would still be a success in the States, it may have potentially been a flop internationally. Sega was always ahead of the curve in terms of innovation, and would have brought online gaming to the mainstream much sooner. As a result, Nintendo would lose a great deal of momentum with the GameCube's unstable internet connectivity. Eventually, Sega would still fall, but they would take someone down with them. Number 4. What if the Defense of the Ancients mod for Warcraft was never made? Blizzard once allowed the community to make open mods for both StarCraft and Warcraft respectively. One of the most popular ones was called Defense of the Ancients, which featured the hero units in 5-on-5 matchups, with towers defending points on the map. Today, it's most well known as its most recent version, DOTA 2, and gave birth to the MOBA genre, as well as new blood into the esports scene. It inspired multiple hit games like League of Legends and Smite, while Blizzard even made their own game with Heroes of the Storm. But what if it didn't happen? Well, for one, Blizzard wouldn't have ended up changing their terms of service and caused a massive backlash that alienated a portion of their fan base, and caused them to move on and make mods for other games. Also, the current esports platform would be slightly different in the States. The RTS genre would have never been a hit over here, but we'd still have the FPS and fighting divisions to fill the void. Number 5. What if Nintendo and Sony ended up making their CD-based console together? Now, this is a big one. Back in the early 90s, Nintendo was set to partner with Sony to create a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo, similar to the Sega CD. Unfortunately, relations went sour, and they ended up working with Philips instead, ultimately producing the ill-fated CDI, while Sony, as we all know, would go on to create the PlayStation, and the rest, as they say, is history. The results certainly didn't hurt either company, as they were both extremely successful. But what if things turned out differently? Honestly, it's hard to say. Like the Sega CD, Nintendo would take a big hit, as the world was just not ready for CD-based console gaming just yet. The PlayStation would have never happened, and the Sega Saturn may have actually been a success. It's possible Nintendo would enter a downward spiral and forced to eventually be reduced to a third-party game developer, while Sega and Microsoft would go on to have a modern-day console war, or even the decline of console gaming in general. Number 6. What if Pac-Man never released in the arcades? If you want to talk about the founding fathers on the Mount Rushmore of video games, Pac-Man is definitely on there. Its popularity wasn't just huge in terms of a game, but became a pop culture phenomenon and is solely responsible for the arcade boom of the early 80s. It's even featured in the Smithsonian's Art of Video Games exhibit. But what if it never even existed? Well, for one, arcades would have never blown up in the States, and over in Japan, once Space Invaders became irrelevant, the few video arcades dedicated solely to that game would close down, and the arcade itself would die out quicker than it started. Games like Double Dragon, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and Dance Dance Revolution would have never seen the light of day, and when the crash of '83 hit, there's almost nothing to help the industry bounce back, and gaming itself would become another dead trend, just like fidget spinners in 2017. Well guys, those are some of the biggest what-if scenarios I could find and think of. Comment below any what-ifs you might have, and be sure to like and subscribe for more content. I'll see you next time.